David Mitchell stood tall in his sleek, modern office, overlooking the sprawling cityscape from his penthouse. As a wealthy businessman in his mid-40s, he had everything most people could dream of: money, power, and influence. The Mitchell family had built a fortune over generations, and David was determined to carry that legacy forward. His company, Mitchell Enterprises, was one of the largest luxury goods distributors in the country, dealing with high-end fashion, jewelry, and rare art. David's life was about appearances, success, elegance, and control. He prided himself on being a sharp businessman, making calculated decisions, and maintaining a reputation as a man who knew what he wanted. But despite his success, David had one major flaw: his inability to see beyond his privileged life. To him, the world was divided into clear categories: those who had, and those who hadn't. And those who hadn't, in his mind, were often judged by their outward appearances. His prejudices, deeply rooted in years of privilege, shaped the way he interacted with the world. David's worldview was simple: the rich deserved their success, while the less fortunate were to be looked at with suspicion. His wealth and status shielded him from the everyday struggles that many faced. He was rarely challenged in his opinions, and in his circle, no one dared question his authority. Amara Thompson, on the other hand, had spent her life fighting against a world that often judged her before she even opened her mouth. She grew up in a small neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, where opportunities were scarce, and dreams were often deferred. Her family, though loving and supportive, had struggled financially, and Amara had learned early on that success didn't come easily for someone who looked like her. Despite these challenges, Amara had worked tirelessly to carve a path for herself. She earned a scholarship to attend a prestigious university, where she excelled academically. After graduation, she started her own business, a boutique consulting firm that helped small businesses grow. Amara was dedicated to her work, and her clients respected her for her expertise and professionalism. However, Amara knew the harsh truth: no matter how hard she worked, the world would often judge her for the color of her skin. She faced microaggressions daily, whether it was at the coffee shop, in the elevator, or during business meetings. People assumed she was lesser because of her appearance, and that prejudice affected her in ways she couldn't always control. One crisp morning, Amara entered the luxurious Oakwood department store, a place she had always dreamed of visiting. She wasn't there to shop for herself; rather, she had a business meeting with a potential client who was interested in high-end products. As she walked past the expensive displays, her eyes caught the attention of David Mitchell, who was browsing nearby with a few of his colleagues. David immediately noticed Amara. She was dressed smartly in a tailored suit, but her presence stood out in the sea of well-dressed shoppers. Her skin was dark, and her hair was styled in a way that defied the traditional corporate norms. David, in his narrow-minded way, made a quick assumption about her. She didn't belong here, in his world of luxury and exclusivity. Without a moment's hesitation, David approached Amara. His voice was cold, laced with suspicion. "I'm afraid you're in the wrong place, miss," he said, eyeing her with a judgmental gaze. "This is a high-end store, not a place for someone like you." Amara's heart skipped a beat. She could feel the weight of his words, the implication that she wasn't welcome. She stood tall, trying to maintain her composure. "I'm here for a business meeting," she said, her voice steady but firm. "I'm a client." David's expression didn't soften. "I don't think you understand," he sneered. "This store is for people who can actually afford it. You're probably here to steal something." Amara was stunned. Her mind raced, trying to process the words he had just spoken. She had expected to face challenges in her life, but not this kind of blatant racism. "I'm not stealing anything," Amara replied, her voice growing stronger. "I'm here to meet someone." "I don't need to steal." But David wasn't listening. His face twisted in disdain, and without any further words, he motioned for the store security to intervene. "Escort her out," he ordered coldly. "She doesn't belong here." Amara tried to protest, but the security guard, who had already been briefed by David, simply stood in her way. She had no choice but to leave the store, her dignity bruised, but not broken. As she walked out, she could feel the eyes of the other customers on her, some with pity, others with judgment. This was the world she had to fight against every single day. Amara Thompson's life did not slow down after the incident at Oakwood department store. If anything, the experience fueled her desire to prove herself even more. She knew that the world would always judge her, but that wasn't going to stop her. The wrongful accusation from David Mitchell only solidified her determination to rise above the prejudice that sought to hold her back. In the weeks following the humiliation at the store, Amara channeled her anger into her work. She poured her energy into growing her consulting firm. Every morning she woke up early to prepare for her day. She had clients who depended on her expertise, small businesses that relied on her guidance to succeed. One of her clients, a family-owned bakery struggling to keep up with larger chains, had managed to land a partnership with a national distributor thanks to Amara's strategic advice. That success story quickly gained attention, and soon, Amara was speaking at local business conferences, sharing her knowledge with others. Though she was still often underestimated by people who didn't know her, her reputation as a professional began to grow. She was invited to participate in high-level meetings, collaborating with people who respected her for her skills and not her appearance. Amara's confidence grew with each passing day. She was no longer the shy woman trying to fit into a world that didn't want her. Instead, she was carving out her own space, one business deal at a time. Despite the occasional setback, Amara's heart remained focused on her goal, to build a legacy that would inspire others to overcome obstacles, no matter how insurmountable they seemed. Her belief in herself and her work had never been stronger, and she was beginning to see the fruits of her labor. On the other hand, David Mitchell's life was starting to unravel. His business empire, once unshakable, was now facing turbulence. The market was changing, and despite his wealth he had failed to adapt to new trends in the industry. His arrogance and refusal to listen to new ideas had cost him valuable opportunities. Investors were pulling out, and his once thriving company was now struggling to stay afloat. At home, David's personal life wasn't much better. His wife, whom he had married for the sake of appearances, had grown distant, fed up with his self-absorbed attitude. His colleagues, once in awe of his power, were beginning to question his judgment. The final blow came when a public scandal hit his company. A leaked email, containing offensive remarks about his employees, went viral. David's reputation took a massive hit, and he found himself in the middle of a media storm. What was once a life of luxury and control now felt like a prison. His arrogance, which had once seemed like strength, now made him appear out of touch, and his isolation deepened. David spent his days holed up in his office, wondering where it had all gone wrong. The same prejudices that had once made him feel superior now seemed like a weight that was dragging him down. His business was in jeopardy, and his personal life was falling apart. He had no one to turn to, and he began questioning the choices that had led him to this point. He had been wrong about many things in his life, and now, more than ever, he realized that his worldview shaped by privilege and narrow-mindedness had only hurt him. In an unexpected twist of fate, David received an invitation to a prestigious award ceremony hosted by one of the top business magazines. The event was to honor individuals who had made significant contributions to their industries. It was an exclusive affair, and the guest list included some of the most influential figures in the business world. David knew that attending this event could be his chance to salvage his reputation. If he could network with the right people, perhaps he could turn his failing company around. David reluctantly accepted the invitation. He knew he needed to be there, but deep down, he was unsure of how he would be received. His name was no longer the powerhouse it once was, and the public scandal still loomed over him. But the allure of the event, the possibility of meeting someone who could help him, was enough to get him to make the effort. Meanwhile, Amara Thompson received an invitation to the same awards ceremony. Her name was now synonymous with success in her field, and she had earned the respect of some of the most powerful people in the business world. The invitation was not just a recognition of her achievements, it was a testament to her hard work and resilience. Amara, unlike David, wasn't attending the ceremony to rebuild her image. She was there because she deserved to be. Her firm was thriving, her reputation as a leader in her field was cemented, and she was finally getting the recognition she had worked so hard for. Though she didn't know it yet, this ceremony would bring her face to face with the man who had once judged her and humiliated her in front of strangers. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton was adorned with gold accents and shimmering chandeliers that hung from the high ceiling like jewels. The atmosphere was one of exclusivity, an invitation-only event that celebrated the very best in business and innovation. The buzz of quiet conversations filled the room as influential entrepreneurs, CEOs, and celebrities mingled with champagne flutes in hand. David Mitchell stood near the entrance, a little out of his element but determined to make an impression. His tailored suit, while expensive, felt stiff against his skin, and the polite smiles of the other guests seemed more like masks than genuine expressions. His mind was still preoccupied with the recent downturn in his business, but tonight he had one goal: to network, to reconnect with the people who could help him salvage his reputation. As he exchanged pleasantries with a fellow businessman, his eyes scanned the room, searching for any sign of an opportunity to rise above his current circumstances. Then the lights dimmed slightly, and the MC stepped up to the microphone, signaling the start of the ceremony. The crowd fell silent, and everyone turned their attention to the stage. "We are now ready to present the award for outstanding leadership in business," the MC announced. "This year's recipient has shown remarkable resilience and vision in her field. Please join me in welcoming Amara Thompson." The words hit David like a bolt of lightning. He had heard of Amara Thompson, of course. She was gaining traction in the business world, but he never imagined she would be here, in this very room. He had dismissed her once, assuming she was nothing more than an outsider, someone who didn't belong in the circles he frequented. Now here she was, being honored as one of the industry's brightest stars. David's eyes widened as a picture of Amara appeared on the massive screen behind the stage, her confident smile lighting up the room. The MC continued speaking, highlighting Amara's remarkable journey, her ability to overcome systemic obstacles, her success in helping small businesses thrive, and her commitment to empowering others. Each word struck David harder than the last. "She's the woman I accused of stealing," David muttered under his breath, his mind racing. The very same woman he had judged so harshly just a few months ago, the one he had dismissed as unworthy, was now standing on stage, receiving the recognition he once thought he was entitled to. The stark contrast between his assumptions and the reality of her success was unbearable. The audience erupted into applause, but David remained frozen. He couldn't shake the image of Amara's face, glowing with pride and confidence, as the applause filled the room. Her accomplishments were undeniable, and his heart sank as he realized the enormity of his mistake. David's mind flashed back to that day at the Oakwood department store. The arrogance with which he had dismissed her, the way he had assumed she was out of place, was now a source of deep shame. The more he thought about it, the worse it seemed. His initial judgment had been based solely on his biases, his privilege, and his arrogance. He had assumed she didn't belong there, that she was somehow lesser, because of her skin color, her appearance, and the way she presented herself. But now, standing in front of him, was the very woman he had wronged, a woman whose strength, intellect, and achievements far exceeded his narrow view of the world. He couldn't help but feel disgusted by his past behavior, but he knew he had to confront it. For the first time, David began to understand how deeply ingrained his prejudices were. He had built an empire on the belief that people like him were entitled to success, while those like Amara were supposed to remain invisible, beneath him. Now, seeing her on that stage, with everyone in the room celebrating her accomplishments, David had no choice but to acknowledge how wrong he had been. The applause continued, and David stood there, a man whose previous sense of superiority had been shattered in an instant. His assumptions about Amara, about people like her, seemed even worse now that he saw her accomplishments in full view. The pride that had once consumed him was now replaced by guilt. His actions had hurt an innocent woman, and his arrogance had blinded him to the truth. This moment was a painful realization, one that would change the way he viewed the world and himself forever. After the ceremony, the guests continued to mingle and enjoy the evening, but David Mitchell's mind was far from the festivities. The weight of his actions was unbearable. He had come to the event hoping to salvage his image, but instead, he had faced the harsh truth about himself. Amara Thompson, a woman he had wronged in the worst possible way, had not only proven him wrong but had become a symbol of everything he had once dismissed. He stood at the edge of the ballroom, his hands slightly trembling. The image of Amara accepting her award, her poised and graceful demeanor, was still fresh in his mind. It had been a wake-up call, one he couldn't ignore. David made his way through the crowd, determined to find Amara. She had just finished speaking with a few other guests when he approached her. His heart raced as he gathered his thoughts. "Amara," David began, his voice low and sincere. "I need to apologize to you. I made a terrible mistake. I judged you based on nothing but my own prejudices. I assumed the worst about you, and I hurt you. I am deeply sorry for what I did." Amara turned to face him, her expression calm but guarded. She could see the guilt in his eyes, the genuine remorse behind his words. For a moment, she said nothing, simply taking in his apology. Amara took a deep breath before speaking, her voice steady but firm. "I appreciate your apology, David," she said. "But words, no matter how sincere, cannot undo the damage that was done. Your actions, that day at the store, were not just disrespectful to me, they were a reflection of the way many people are treated based on assumptions, based on nothing but the color of their skin." David nodded, feeling the sting of her words, but he didn't interrupt. He knew this wasn't going to be easy. "I've worked hard for everything I have, and I don't need anyone's validation," Amara continued. "What you did was hurtful, but I believe in growth. I believe in change. If I can rise above it all, I believe you can, too. I'm not angry with you anymore, but you have to understand that this goes beyond a simple apology. It's about understanding the impact of your actions and making a real effort to change." David listened carefully, his heart heavy with the truth of her words. "I see now that you are a much stronger person than I ever gave you credit for," David said, his voice barely a whisper. "I was wrong and I have a lot to learn. How can I change? What should I do?" Amara paused for a moment, considering his question. "Start by challenging your own biases. Understand that people are not defined by the way they look, but by their actions, their character, and their contributions. Use your platform to elevate others, to create opportunities for those who are often overlooked, and never, ever let your privilege blind you to the reality of what others go through." As David stood there, taking in Amara's words, he realized how much he had to learn. The world wasn't as simple as he had once thought. He had spent years believing that his wealth and status made him superior, that he was entitled to make judgments about others without considering their experiences. But now, he saw the world in a different light. The ceremony had not only given Amara the recognition she deserved, but it had also given David the opportunity to begin his own journey of change. He would never be able to undo the hurt he had caused, but he could make the choice to do better moving forward. "I'll try," David said, his voice filled with determination. "I'll work to be a better person. For you, for everyone I've wronged." Amara gave him a small, knowing smile. "I believe you can. Just remember, growth is a process. Don't expect it to happen overnight, but don't give up either." As Amara walked away, David stood there for a moment, watching her disappear into the crowd. For the first time in a long time, he felt a sense of clarity. He was no longer the man who had judged others from a place of privilege and ignorance. He was a man who had learned from his mistakes and was ready to embrace the change that was long overdue. The story of Amara and David was one of personal growth, a reminder that we all have the power to change, to grow, and to be better. It was a story that showed the importance of seeing beyond appearances, of understanding that true value lies in actions, not assumptions. It was a story that urged everyone to judge others not by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And as the evening wore on, David knew that his life, too, was beginning to change one step at a time.